everybody. It's Pastor Royce here with the Church of Harvest Family Ministries podcast. Today is a super exciting day as we get into September, into the change of seasons, pivoting from summer into the autumn season. I am joined here by an amazing human being, Mrs. Ariel Griffin. So how are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. Well, as you guys know, we've been videoing these recently, so it'll be available on YouTube, but also audio format. And we just exist to be a resource, as you go through month to month. We release these typically once a month. Just kind of recap the things that we did in the past month and kind of looking forward to the upcoming month. And so as I am joined here by Ariel, introduce yourself to everybody.
Well, glad to be here. I don't know if I have that much wisdom to offer, but it is a blessing to be at Church of the Harvest outside of church, serving here. I oftentimes am home because that's where I work, and my 40-hour gig is I'm providing technical support and education in the 10 countries where we work.
International, right?
Outside of that, I'm also serving as a coach, helping people navigate some difficulties in their life. Also serve as a consultant where I develop e-courses in areas of diversity. So just doing a lot of different things in addition to being a wife and a mom in that order.
Well, and you have an amazing family that I know my family is close to and loves very much. Matter of fact, I got to have a conversation with your husband last night. We geeked out over the Spider-Man movie. And so as an illustrator and comic book fan, that was a fun moment to get to hang out with him a little bit and chat with something that I'm very passionate about. And you have two beautiful children. Tell us about your kiddos.
Yes. So our oldest is William Augustus Griffin Jr. That's the full government name. We call him Memo. And he's 3.
He's great.
He was born April 2020. So that
in the thick of it.
Yeah, in the thicket. But it was awesome actually for us because we didn't have to tell people don't kiss our baby.
Yeah.
So that was really great. And then our youngest is Oro, Emmanuel Oro. We call him Oro, which means gold, not just in Spanish, but also in my dad's language. My dad's from Nigeria, so it was really cool that we found a word that meant the same in both of those languages.
That's awesome. Yeah. So how many, I know that you raise the boys bilingual, and there's a lot of Spanish that goes on there too, but are there any other languages that are in the mix in your household?
Yeah, so I do my best to stay in English, and I'll try for this podcast.
Yeah, I got a little bit of Spanglish in me, but that's about it.
I know. I've been speaking Spanish all day, so I'm translating some things. But all that being said is, yes, so it's primarily Spanish at home. English is sprinkled in every once in a while because our oldest gets that in school. So we try our best to go in on the Spanish. And then in addition to that, my husband actually knows French. That's what he studied in school.
Okay,
so,
I did not know that. Him and my daughter, Chloe, will have good conversations in French.
We learned. Yeah. Chloe knows some French. I busted out my random, je m'appelle,
Dude, I can't do French. That's not my jam.
Yeah, so in addition, because my organization, we work in the Philippines. So I tried to learn some Tagalog. I watch a lot of K-dramas. So I've been on Mango Languages and Korean.
Let's go.
It's pretty cool because our oldest, Memo, he's only 3, but he can recognize that there's different languages. Mm-hmm. And so I'll be like, okay, so if you want to say this in another language, he'll repeat it.
Right.
And it's not like, oh, what's that? That's weird. So he's gotten accustomed to that.
Yeah, the cognitive process of language development, especially with kids, right? You're super malleable in that 0 to 4 age range. And so it's like a superpower that they have. Odd little known fact about my life. My mom was actually fluent in Spanish before she was fluent in English, but she lost it by the time she was 8. Yes. She grew up on a military base, and so that was a common thing, but she lost it because it is one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it on the language front, because the part of the brain that it kind of excites and elicits, it's pretty, there's a point where it gets locked in. Yeah. But anyway, I always thought that was super cool because obviously, you typically, like, there's kids coming to church and there's a primary language that's spoken in the house, and it kind of cognitively associates to their visual reality, and then you guys come in here speaking like all these languages, and the
Throwing
kids,
people off.
it's like, wait, that's William, that's Emmanuel, and it's like, that's Ordo, that's Memo, like, and it's like, oh wow, how does this is so cool to me. Like, I love those kinds of, like, how did you come to that conclusion with how you're going to raise your kids? And I just think it's a super cool part of life, because it's, we're in the middle of the country, you guys. Like, there's people speak English and bad English, and then that's it. That's kind of it. Like, I bust out Greek words all the time, and people just look at me like I have an arm growing out of my face, and I'm like, I'm not speaking in Greek. Like, I teach the Bible, and it's got two languages primarily. I mean, Aramaic is in there, but
biblical Greek is on Mango Languages. By the way.
Hey,
and I think biblical Hebrew
the plug.
As well.
I will say Greek, Koine Greek is easier hill to tackle than Hebrew, unless you have some friends from Jerusalem that can help you with your Hebrew. But I did want to talk because obviously, your kiddos are younger, right? And so you're kind of experiencing the seasons of parenting in obviously complicated forms, right? When your kiddos are younger, they're a little bit, everything isn't complicated necessarily, but the dependence type is a lot more complicated than as it is when they get older. So it's kind of like there's these trades that happen in parenting where as children gain more independence, other areas of their life become more complex and complicated. But in the area that you're in, how do the changing of the seasons, and I don't mean that obviously we're on the crux of, August into September. And so with that comes the conclusion of the summer and the beginning of autumn. And so we can look at it that way, but I more mean the seasons of life, right? The seasons of, transitioning from one mode of interaction to a different mode of interaction. How does that work in your family dynamic right now? Like, is it really impactful as the natural seasons change? Does that kind of dictate things? Because I know a lot of parents, kiddos are getting settled into school in September. There's new friend groups. Maybe you had a kiddo go from one school to another, maybe elementary to middle or middle to high school. So how does that work for you guys? Like, are there dynamic changes that are kind of happening all the time, or are they kind of incremental?
Yes. I guess I can sum it up in the Disney song Bare Necessities.
There you go. Hey, let's get back to basics.
I mean, because you're right, there's a lot of seasons changing, but I feel like for our family, we care about the transitions. So I think if we focus on, hey, a season's changing, it can be stressful if you don't think about the transitions. And, my background, I was in the classroom. I was a high school teacher.
Yeah.
So all that being said is that for me, I realized that if I was in front of a group of students, it wasn't about, the next thing that I wanted to teach. It was always about how am I going to transition them from one activity to another? How do I transition them into my classroom after they've left another classroom? And so in our family, it's the same way, where the transitions are the important piece. So right now, we're in a transitionary period because even though many people have started school, many programs don't start until September.
Sure. Yeah. And
so for us, for example, Memo will start soccer in September. He started when he was 2. We're like hardcore soccer fans. Hey. So he's not.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We'll get him there.
A little nervous. I was like, oh no, I can't force this on him, but we're going to try for a minute. All that being said is that, he started soccer in September, and we've had a lot of transition in our life. Like I said, he was born during the pandemic, and we've moved. He's on his 3rd house that he's lived in.
Okay.
And we were renting, but now we're buying this house. So we're moving into this place of permanence.
Yep.
But even in that, we had like a church search before we settled on Church of the Harvest. And so every Sunday he'd be like, what church are we going to?
Well, that can be really difficult to navigate, obviously, with that age range when they're little, especially when they're little and they were born in the middle of a pandemic.
Exactly.
Right. The social anxieties and acclimation to individuals is a crazy thing to think about. Yep.
So we've just gotten him accustomed to change. And so on his side, he wakes up and he's like, so what are we going to do today? Are we going to do this? And he'll present all the options based on things that he's seen. But we've met him where he is by saying, hey, this is our plan for what's happening next. So we like meet each other, right? And I think that's something that's been really helpful. So when we get in the car, after I pick him up from preschool, he's accustomed to us doing a couple things. One of the things he knows, I'm going to ask him about his day. And in the beginning, he used to be like, no popó en los pantalones, right? Like, I didn't poop in my pants today.
I knew what that one meant.
And then eventually I was like, okay, so now that we've gotten that, you know, now I want to know more about your school day, you know, like what'd you eat? Because he brings his food to school. And so then it was just like, I didn't poop in my pants and I ate all my food.
There we go.
And now we're finally getting to the point where he can tell me about his day yesterday. He talked about his teacher, and I asked him if she was nice, and he goes, and pretty too. So I'm learning new things about my
preferences. He's developing preferences.
I was like, okay, noted. This is the type of girl that my child likes, you know? So I think it's just like constantly adjusting as they're growing in those seasons, but being mindful of transitions. And now he associates after school, I get in the car and I talk to my mom about my day.
Yep, for sure. So I think one of the things I'm notorious for telling parents especially is that parenting has to be proactive, right? The proactive, like especially around inevitabilities. Not all things in parenting are inevitable. Like for a long time, people tried to convince me that parenting teenagers had to be hard. And it doesn't have to be hard. Like I have a 16-year-old. Like I've parented teenagers that didn't have my last name. Like it can be fun. It is largely a matter of perspective. And one of the things I'm also notorious for saying is that focus determines your future. So what you decide to focus on, where you decide to put your perspective, will in large part, and this actually is true like neurologically, your perceptual system, the part of your brain that is your eyeballs actually influences how you experience that change. And so it works on a lot of different levels, but that proactive nature of parenting, whenever it comes to the reality of just the inevitability of change, because change is going to happen, but change doesn't have to be difficult. And so I think as we anticipate, right, our seasons and our transitions, having a organically optimistic outlook, not to use alliteration because that's what preachers do, but that's what that was. But yeah, having an organically optimistic outlook is an option. Like that's on the table. And so I think it's very interesting that as you're talking about that, one other thing that I do want to point out too is the conversation, right? So I'm real big. It's one of those things that does tend to get more complicated. It doesn't have to get more complicated as your kiddos get older. But obviously, when you're dealing with a 3, 4, 5-year-old kiddo and you ask them, how was your day? That can be very different than asking your 15, 16, 17-year-old kiddo. You do, one of the things I will just be practical with is kind of like sharpening the questions. So one of the notorious questions that we have in our household is, who did you play with today? Because I really want to know about the relationships that my kids are forming. And then I want to get to understand a little bit of the personalities that are going on there. Just because I spent a lot of time in the cognitive behavioral realm. And so I can kind of, go SEAL Team 6 on the subconscious of what's going on in my daughter's friends groups, which is very different from my oldest to my youngest. But the other thing that we ask when we eat, and we do make it a practice to eat dinner together, even though my oldest has a work schedule and, she babysits and she nannies and she's very tied in a lot of different directions. We still make it a priority to eat a meal together a day. And the question about that was, what's been your favorite part of the day? Right. So just kind of taking those more broad questions and bringing them into a little bit finer detail, getting similar information. But again, it's enforced with just that practice of when when your 3-year-old, 4-year-old gets in the car, they know this is what's going to happen. There's an expectation that's set. So how would you say that you guys deal with change in a general sense? I know that obviously that question is always answered by, well, it depends on the change. But how do you feel like each person kind of navigates the differences of life that come?
Yeah, I think in a general sense, it's always important to know, like, God's got it. Yeah. Because I think that immediately, depending on the person, some people are like, they can't handle with the monotony of life, so they're always trying to change things. But I would say the average person is adverse to change, and it immediately makes them freeze up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, there's something different happening. And so for us, like, we first acknowledge there's a change. We acknowledge God is sovereign.
There you go. Yeah.
Has complete power, control, and he knows what he's doing. And then we look at the change. And I think in our household, you know, we do like warnings. Our oldest is a child who likes to know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be the same thing every time.
Sure.
And so we try our best to let him know what's within our realm of control and what's not in our realm of control. And I think that's really, really important. And then I would just say, I mean, we have a 9-month-old, and so his sleep patterns change every day. And that affects all of us.
For sure. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So we just try to, you know, sometimes when we wake up, one or all of us wakes up on the wrong side of the bed because we didn't sleep the night before. And so we really try to be honest with how we're feeling in the moment.
Yep.
I know that a lot of people talk about conscious parenting, gentle parenting. I'm reading a book called Very Intentional Parenting.
Okay.
It's a great one. Recommend it. It's taken a lot, but one thing that it talks about is the importance of reparenting yourself.
Yeah.
Because sometimes our reactions to change is depicted by our family of origin and how we were taught to respond to change.
So good.
And so I think that's really important because in any given moment, how I react to change is going to be different than how my husband reacts to change. But what's cool is we actively get to impact how our children react to change because we're in that process now with them.
Right.
So that down the road, should they become parents, they get the opportunity to say, oh, I know how to deal with change. And they're starting to go through the process that we're leading them through right now.
For sure. Yeah. I love the, you know, obviously with the statement being, you know, parenting is a very proactive thing. Obviously being proactive is a very intentional part of that. And I think too, the importance of understanding God's sovereignty in the midst of our ignorance sometimes, right? Like I tell people all the time, like I know how to parent my 16-year-old today. It doesn't mean I'm going to know how to parent my 16-year-old yesterday. And it also doesn't mean that I know how to do that from my personal experience, kind of speaking to the reparenting part. My journey was such that I didn't grow up. I have my stepdad, but he was largely gone a lot of times. And so male influence in my life was kind of sketchy, and my dad wasn't around. And so it was like my mom. I grew up in a women's shelter for the first 4 years. And then, you know, it's just always kind of these not so ideal situations. And when I came to essentially Christ, my first adventure with God was, God, you know, how are you a father? How do you father? And really intently searching the scriptures, looking for the revelation of God as dad, which is really complicated in a way because like I longed for that. Now I've had the experience of meeting people who are very adverse to that because of their family of origin and because the connotation with the title father has been marred or scarred by a person who did not live up to the responsibility of that title. But for me, it was like I really longed after that. Now, the beautiful byproduct of that in my life has been really the gift of understanding my sonship, right? Like if you explore who God is as a father, that directly infers the role of the child, you know, like you're his kid. And that's, you know, I know people who have been born into incredible situations, for example. Like I would say your kiddos, they're born into this incredible mother-father dynamic. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason you're here. And you guys are amazing parents, just like so many parents here at Church of the Harvest. And so, you know, as many of you I can grab and put on video and help influence the general population, like I totally will. Because I've told people all the time, like I do, like it's not a matter of judgment on a negative side, but there's maybe no greater fruit of a marriage than a teenager. And so especially with people who have really good teenagers, I'm like, I need to talk to you or have you written a book? or two, because I need you to give some influence to the world, because this thing isn't easy. Parenting is not just like I only have 2 kids, and that's complicated enough because each kid wildly different. Personality. Different. It's like, how can we come from the same DNA, and the same genetics, and have such wildly different realities? So let me ask you this: who in your kiddos, who represents you more, and who represents your husband more?
Yeah, that's a weird one. So everyone says they both look like him, but they look drastically different. So I was like, I've got to be somewhere in there. But as far as personality, I would say, so William and I, when we got married, we prayed and we said, Lord, let our house be a home of joyful love.
Yeah, amen.
And we've gotten to see the fruit and God responding to that in our children.
So let me say one thing on that note, because some of you guys don't know, but Memo, every time I see him on a Sunday morning, he just runs at me and jumps on me, and he's a little ball of joyful love. Really is. Mission accomplished thus far. We'll see if it carries on to him being 14. But right now, I'm so stoked every time I see him.
He's like 0 or 100. He's got real strong emotions. So, and that side comes from me. He's 100% I love you, or don't even talk to me, And that's
luckily I haven't encountered the second one thus far.
It's true, because he loves it. He loves Church of the Harvest. As soon as we come out of our neighborhood, because we're a mile and a half away, we get on Black Pop, and he's like, Church of the Harvest, Church of the Harvest. Yeah.
That's so cool.
So all that being said is, they both have these different versions of joyful love. So when Memo was 3 months, I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and he was making me laugh. In the middle of the night, a 3-month-old, and I was I wake William, I was like, this kid's going to be a comedian. Hopefully not literally.
Let's go. No, it's great.
So I was he's definitely going to be a comedian, and he has been that way. He always tries to make people laugh. And if they won't laugh, he'll just laugh harder, because he's I know I'm funny. And Oro, already at 9 months, he loves to laugh.
Okay, so I walked into the nursery this past Sunday, and I can't remember maybe it was Chloe was holding him, but Chloe's back was to me, and he just looked at me.
The eyebrows.
He was a little suspicious at first, and then he just smiled so big, and I was like, my man, what's up? Because I have encountered Oro's other side. I've encountered his sleepy side. You know what I'm saying? The before sleep side.
Have I eaten, or I need to sleep? He's very he's
He'll let
got
you
strong
know.
Emotions as well.
He will let you know.
That being said, it's my mom used to say, a clown can't perform unless they have an audience. Okay. And so Memo clown, Oro audience. That's literally how we're rolling in the house every day.
Love it.
So I would say, the parts of William that are really clear is that they both really like to explore, especially Oro. Mm-hmm. And William, he's always investigating things.
Right.
He doesn't. I would say he doesn't take people at their word, but that sounds negative. But it's more so he's not going to assume that people are speaking truth, because he knows that we repeat things that we hear. Mm-hmm, so he's always going to find out and fact check. Yeah. Whereas me, I'm like, oh, that sounds like a good fact. Let me spit that one out. I'm not going to check the background. It sounds accurate to me, and he's very different in that way. And I would say Oro's already starting to show those sides. He's always trying to figure out what's going on. His memory is so strong. He'll start playing with something he's not supposed to, and I'll put it behind my back. I forgot, and I put it behind my back. Next thing you know, my child's holding it behind my back. So,
at 9 months.
Yes. Yeah. And at 9 months, and he's been doing that for a while. Yeah. And William had a dream, and he said Oro's gonna walk early, and I was like, please just be a day earlier than when Memo did it. But at 2 weeks, he was already trying to push up and pull up and all sorts of stuff, and I'm already seeing, he's not gonna fully crawl. I think he's gonna jump to walking, so that's been really interesting that he's hitting different milestones at different ages. Yep. And I think the good and the bad and the ugly are reflected in our children. So I think, I've seen in both of them, especially Memo, because Oro's 9 months, he's a baby. But in Memo, I've seen that he reacts sometimes before processing it. And I that's the side of me that I'm like I should have processed that a little bit longer before reacting. And something that I read in this book that I had mentioned earlier was, if you walk around like without processing the things that you've experienced in the day, you're going to be easily triggered. And so she gives the tip of like, hey, when you're just like driving, not thinking, well, I'm always thinking, some people can go without thinking, but when you're just driving, going from point A to point B, take some deep breaths, because you never know what your child's going to do when you get to that destination.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that so that I'm not walking in this state of just like being triggered. And I think that has been really important. So I've been trying to apply that with Memo via Daniel Tiger.
There we go. Let's go.
Shout out to Mr. Rogers. And so just like, it's worth it to count down and to take deep breaths, even when you're not in a place where you feel like you need to take a deep breath.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, God made our bodies that way.
Mm-hmm.
Where like taking in air and breathing is not just a way just to go through life and survive, but it's a way to deal with the things that are like thrown your way, whether it's in parenting or whether it's, your work or your family life or your social life. So that's kind of.
Yeah, I think too, just like, and I walk this out with my wife quite a bit. I tend to be more of a big picture person, so I tend to like look at the season as like a whole corpus of activities. My wife's a little bit more micro in her vision, and that has great benefits, especially when matched with somebody that is kind of looking out on the horizon. I think that's pretty stereotypical of like, it's been said that like men try to look at the horizon, but women see the spider that's right on their, right in front of them. And the gender roles and how the vision process works, it can alter, drastically. And in a lot of ways in my world, I'm more the verbal processor and more of the kind of like outspoken, emotional type person. My wife is a little bit more of the like somber, she doesn't need to talk about it kind of person, which is a little bit different in most, or stereotypical dynamics. But when you talk about, I want to touch on this because you talk about pretty dynamic change from the day to day, meaning like, sometimes oral sleep's good, sometimes he doesn't. It's going to kind of alter things. What's been the importance practically, or just some of the things that have helped establish rhythm in your household? Because I know you mentioned that Memo, he needs an expectation at least set within, a general span of time, or, so what does that look like with the dynamic changes? And then what's been really important in the space of rhythm?
Yeah. So I think that sometimes, especially those who have watched a lot of podcasts or listened to podcasts or watched TikToks about parenting, when in the secular space, the way that we talk about rhythm is like, you got to have routines, right? But I feel like this is a unique space because I can talk about how God talks about rhythm.
Sure. Please
and
do.
For us, the thing that has to be consistent is work, rest, right? And I think that's really, really important to understand that for our children, what looks like work to them, it might be different than what it was for us when we were children. And what looks like rest to them might be different. And, God rested not because he needed to, but because like he all is about modeling.
Right.
And he knew that we were going to need it.
Right.
And so that's one thing that's been really important for us to look at our week and be like, okay, so this is what work looks like. Sometimes preschool might feel like work.
Sure.
Sometimes it feels like actually rest for him. And when he gets home to us, because we're always thinking and processing and talking, that might feel like work, And so just being mindful that sometimes his reactions is maybe because he just needs rest in the way that he as a 3-year-old or a 9-month-old might experience rest. That's, I think, one piece. I think the other piece that has been really important for us is the reality that we always talk about balance. And I've come to believe that in Christian space, this like balance is different. It's like God balance. If our purpose is to give God glory, and glory is weightiness that God takes, that's pretty unbalanced.
Yeah, there's
right?
actually a really great, as you were mentioning that, like the immediate thought that I have, like I can picture where this book is in my house. Like there's a book called The Myth of Balance. It's a brilliant book. But yeah, I think people sometimes we kind of like gamify or stress about certain things and concepts that like actually when you really look at it like don't exist. I'll give you a small example and then we'll go back to what we were talking about, because like self-esteem is a really big topic of conversation a lot of times, and it's not real. Like there's actually not a system of self-esteem that we can even find like neurologically. There is a reality of how you understand your value from God's perspective, being made in the image and likeness of God, and it's intrinsic to all human beings. But that's wildly different than self-esteem. That's understanding God's esteem for his creation. So anyway, that's again just a little example of some of these kind of myth type things. I think balance is a huge one, but I also know that the concept that you're kind of hinting at is runs super deep in your family. And here's how I know that. So this concept of like Sabbath and like what Hebrews talks about, we work for a Sabbath day rest. And that concept of just like, okay, hold on. Like there's effort that produces rest kind of in a way. Another way that I've thought about it, or that it kind of works out in my mind is, like, Matthew chapter 6, blessed are the peacemakers, right? Well, a peacemaker is not someone who's just calm all the time. A peacemaker is someone who knows how to war well.
I needed that today.
Like, yeah, well, that's when that hits, when you understand that peace is a secondary consequence of being able to war very well. Like there's a reason why the United States, for, all intents and purposes, like is a peaceful place. There's a reason we're not getting bombed, and like places like the Ukraine and are in that conflict. Not to have any type of political conversations about it, but people know, like, we know how to war well. So peace is a secondary consequence of that. In the similar way, right? Rest is this consequence of being able to work well. And I remember the first time that Chloe babysat Memo and Oral, and you guys had a Google Doc of like tasks and tips and tricks, and me in my chaotic, I'm a creative illustrator, like that was my past, and so my artistic ADD was just like, I can't even contemplate the level of put together that these people are. But then too, in conversation, we're like a pinball machine. We just bounce from one place to the next that seems like it doesn't have any corollary like hitting points. And so it's so funny to me, like how the organization that helps stabilize that in your guys' life. And I get it. I get how for the organic structure that is your family, it's absolutely necessary. Because if it weren't that, it'd be chaos. Massive chaos. And no rhythm, and all responsiveness. And I love to just see, because I know it's super purposeful. It doesn't come without very purposeful, proactive. And a lot of times that probably was produced out of like a painful moment. It's like, oh, when I don't do that, when I don't put in the work, like work in first pressure in first pain, right? Whenever that's perceived correctly, it creates strength. Right. But it's going to be hard either way. It's really hard when you don't do it. Like, it's like I tell people all the time, like dieting is hard, but you know what's harder? Having type 2 diabetes. Yeah. That's way harder. Yeah. Right. So it's like the work's going to happen. The work can be for you, or it can be something that's happening to you. Yeah. Right. So I think in establishing that the rhythm of rest, obviously Sabbath is a very big concept, and it's inferred with peace, right? And I know that
it's one of the 10 commandments, which I think is really important for people to acknowledge, right?
For sure.
Is that like, there's some of the 10 commandments that people are like, oh yeah, I shouldn't kill somebody. Duh. And
we'll just go to the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And just get all that blown up.
Yeah. I mean, there's some that people are like, oh yeah, lying probably bad, because like the Bible even talks about there's a place for the people who lie. But when it comes to the Sabbath, it's like, but I got to get things done. How am I going to put food on my table? Yeah. And we make all these excuses for rest. Yeah.
No, for sure. And that, I think, is uncomfortable for a lot of people. Like this is my own pet theory. I can make this argument from a psychological standpoint, but a lot of times, like when I was in the business world, you hear that all the time. Like, how are you doing it? Well, I'm busy. And I was always like, are you busy or productive? Because those are not the same thing. A lot of times we feel like the more we work, the more valuable that we are. We're trying to find value by putting something forward that other people perceive as value. And there can be a huge trap in that, because we can get so busy trying to prove our worth that we never rest in the realization that the worth has been satisfied and was put on full display on the cross. Like, there's no greater worth that's displayed in a human life than God incarnating himself in flesh and dying the death that we deserve. Like, there's no higher value system there. And in Ephesians chapter 2, like, we've been reconciled to God. And make sure that we understand that concept. That's different than you've been reconciled to Adam. I preached a sermon in 2019 called Irresistible Grace, and it was one of the concepts that I brought up, because I think a lot of times in our Christian life, and especially like sometimes in our parenting, maybe in our marriage, we live like we've been reconciled to Adam, which is back to kind of the zero mark. And if you mess up, then you're in the negative. And if you do good, you're in the positive. And so you build this works-oriented way of relating to God. The problem with that, especially in parenting, is that then it bleeds over into the life of your kids. So the way that we value our kids sometimes is based off of their performance. And I would caution anyone that's in that space, because it does not reflect God. And so effectively, where we don't reflect God, we're missing the mark, i.e. we're sinning against that person. And a lot of times that's our family. So there's massive need for repentance a lot of times, but it comes with understanding, no, my worth isn't proven by my busyness or my work. My work was proven on the cross, and that's just a gift that I have to receive.
I think you're saying something really important. And I think that piece is related to, when we talk about seasons and rhythms and all those pieces, is there's a reality, particularly in the United States, particularly in Johnson County. Where people oftentimes are like, how do I find my rhythm? And sometimes your rhythm's got too much going on, right? As you were talking, you're like, in the business world. And I was like, why is there an I in business? Because if you put a Y, you'd be telling too much truth.
Busyness.
Because it really is.
I love
like,
that.
It is,
bars.
There's so much
gangster.
busyness, and that is, sometimes we're like, oh, my kid has to be in this, and has to be this, and
Oh,
be in this,
man.
and be in this, and we're trying to
Preach,
find a
girl.
rhythm.
Preach.
But like, for those who are musical, you know that if you have too many notes going on, you can't hear the harmony. You know, like, so at the end of the day, some people, like, the way that they find their rhythm in different seasons is saying no to some stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And determining, I think, bringing it back to your point, is how do you determine what goes as a part of that rhythm, and what do you say no to and what do you say yes to? And that's why I say we have to have a God balance, that like, we are looking to the Lord. He cares about those details. Like, the same God who gave all the dimensions for an ark, right, that was never needed before that time, cares about what our daily looks like.
Right.
Like, the same, he gave so many details about how people were going to, go around Jericho.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like, then obviously he cares about what we do with our day, our week, our month, our year, our season.
Well, I think a lot of times one of the things that I've seen get kind of confused is the difference between spontaneity and inspiration. Those are not the same thing. Inspiration, that has that same idea of spirit, right? To inspire you inspire, you expire, you inhale, you exhale, right? That God inspired into the form of the clay, and it became Adam, right? But there were so many things. One of the things that you said, this kind of goes back to the glory part, right? Glory follows order, to your point of the dimensions, to the point of the plan, the rhythms, right? Like, before God's presence filled a place, he gave a plan so that the presence could be held by that thing before the ark, right? So similarly, the glory that's found, and I find this so interesting because back to the 10 Commandments, right? Honor your father and mother. Okay, here's something I learned recently. That word honor is that same word for glory that weightiness is associated with, kavod, right? So make heavy the relationship with your mother and father. Or, as parents, as we can hear it, relate to my kids in such a way that it would inspire the weightiness of the responsibility of the relationship that I have with him. I don't know how practical that is, but I think on just a super practical note, one of the ways that we do that in my house is you can have one area, a performance, a sport, a music, a band, whatever. You can have one of those, but the importance of the spiritual formation and the context that happens within, meaning church, is preeminent, because nothing in our culture, nothing in our schools, nothing in their world relates to them on an ontological level, like a being level, an identity level, outside of a relationship with God. And if not, they're going to try to source it from other places. Ariel, our time's up.
Yeah.
I appreciate you so big. Love you so much, and can't wait to hear more from you in this space. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.